A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, a special edition.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 79. I'm your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host, John Llewellyn. How's it going, John?
How's it going, buddy?
It's the Ides of March.
It is.
It's the 15th of March.
It is.
And we all know that's when Julius Caesar got it stabbed in the back, I think. Isn't that what? I don't know. Is that actually historically accurate?
Spoiler alert.
Yes.
I have no idea.
It was probably just Shakespeare picked it. I have a goofy, if you'll indulge me. We were talking before the show about music, but I actually have a slightly music-related story about the Ides of March, which is probably only entertaining to me. But it involves English singer-songwriter Robyn Hitchcock. Are you aware of Robyn Hitchcock? I
am aware of Robyn Hitchcock.
But but you don't really know him. You don't know
but I'm aware of his work.
So for people who don't know, Robyn Hitchcock is he's the closest thing to, well, this is a bad analogy, but he's easiest way to describe it. In some ways, he's the heir apparent of Syd Barrett, kind of like a mixture of Syd Barrett and Bob Dylan in a way. You know, he started out as a punk and he's known for kind of, between songs doing like kind of strange free associating monologues and stuff. He's a very intelligent guy. He's very, very, traditionally what people would think of as a kind of a psychedelic thinker, even though I don't think drugs are a part of his thing. Anyway, this is a long time. I'm taking this story long. Anyway, years and years ago, I met him at a record store. He was doing a signing, and it was my birthday, which is in the beginning of March. It's the 4th of March, and one of the guys behind the counter, I knew him, and he just kind of thought it would be, think that maybe I'd get like an extra special signature on my CD from Robyn Hitchcock. And he goes, "Oh, it's Robert's birthday today." And he goes, "Oh, it was my birthday yesterday. People always tell me that the 3rd of March is the Ides of March, but I think it's really the 15th. And it was just this thing where it's like...
Who tells him the 3rd of March is the Ides of March?
I don't know. And that was a thing, like, I didn't know whether he was just, like, trying to be Robyn Hitchcock a little bit, or that's just who he is.
Yeah.
But, for you Robyn Hitchcock fans out there, that's a little anecdote, I'm sure. It's very appropriate because what's going on this week in Austin?
South by... Yes, I missed the first weekend I was out of town, but Gareth Edwards was here, and then he left town and I came into town, so we kind of tagged out there.
You guys didn't have lunch or anything?
So, what's that?
You guys didn't meet up for lunch?
No. Well, I wasn't in town. So the first weekend. So for those of you who are kind of, again, like me with Robyn Hitchcock, if you're aware of South by Southwest, but you're not really familiar with how it works, and how it works has changed over the years. So the way it works today is it basically stretches across 2 weekends. The first weekend traditionally was kind of the kickoff of a film festival. And over the years, that has also grown to include like a tech conference, basically, and convention. And then you have kind of a week, and then that second weekend is the music convention / music festival. that week in between has increasingly become filled in with music shows and events and other things, what have you. But so he was there, I assume, for kind of the tech / film portion of the event, of the festival. So he was talking about Rogue One, and so we, he was saying he was asked about the end of Rogue One because we all know the ending changed, and he said basically that it was just too long, that the tower from which they had to transmit the data on the Death Star was in a different building, and so that's why in some of the trailers we saw the shots of Cassian and Jyn running across the beach carrying that hard drive, and then that wasn't in the final movie. It's because, well, they didn't have to go anywhere. It was just, he said it just felt a little too long, and so they rejiggered it to where, okay, well, we'll just put the tower, the satellite dish is on the same building. It's just on the top of the building. And so that is one of the things they had to reshoot. Another thing that they put in very late, even later than I expected, was the scene, where Darth Vader shows up. He, breaks into the rebel ship. They have the data disk. They're trying to get it out of the system. He shows up, he busts in, and then he just starts killing rebels with his lightsaber. Gareth Edwards called it the Walk of Death. That was apparently a very late edition, as in 3 or 4 months before release, is what he said. And Jabes, I don't know who Jabes would be. Someone associated with the movie. He just says Jabes, Jabez.
It sounds like a nickname for Jack Black or something.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah. Right. So he's hanging out with Jack Black. He's hanging out with
exactly.
Jabes. So anyway, so he the initial version of the scene, Vader shows up, but I think they just blow up the Mon Cal ship, with the Star Destroyer or something. So the quote is that he says, he arrives and obliterates the calamari ship, and then the blockade runner gets out just in time and he pursues the blockade runner. And then Jabes was like, I think we need to get Darth on that ship. And I thought, yeah, that's a brilliant idea and we'd love to do it, but there's no way they're going to let us do it. It's a big number, and we had 3 or 4 months before release. So Kathleen Kennedy came in, whoever Jabes is, pitched it to her, and she loved it. And so then within a week or two, they were at Pinewood shooting that scene.
Wow.
So
that's amazing.
Yeah, that is a very late edition. And you can kind of, that whole stretch, really does kind of feel like a coda to the movie in some way.
Yeah.
They finally show, they go through all of the, the rebels dying, and they get to Jyn and Cassian, and they die. And then from then on, none of the kind of main core cast is in the movie anymore, but the movie keeps going. And so to me, it always felt like this kind of coda, like, oh, by the way, and then here's how we get from A to B. And so, so the idea that was put in at the very end, or towards the very end, that makes sense, that they, not that idea and that coda piece that they just stuck this whole thing on at the end. But yeah, we can play with that a little bit. We can make it a little different. We can add some elements there because, you can add elements there and you can dramatically change that scene without having to call the main cast back and get them to do even more reshoots than they had already done. So that in some ways is kind of like an easier thing to put in the movie than like, oh, hey, and by the way, we want Bodhi Rook to do a new thing now.
Yeah, it goes
so that was Gareth Edwards here in Austin. Various things coming out about Rogue One now.
Yeah, it goes to show you that in a lot of ways, Rogue One was a much larger. They took a lot more risks than you would even think for a movie that size. I think we had, I think in earlier episodes when when less footage had come out and we didn't really understand the scope of the movie, I'm sure I probably had remarked that I had thought that this was going to be a more modestly budgeted affair in comparison to like the saga movies. In retrospect, I don't think that's true at all. I think this movie cost on par the same about, except for maybe the salaries for the actors, about the same as The Force Awakens when, everything's said and done. And it makes you realize, like, wow, they really did take a gamble because, again, I've read a bit and pieces of these Gareth Edwards interviews that have been kicking around this week, and he did an a IAMA or whatever, which I don't know. I think it was just it was one.
I think that term now people just use that for any kind of Q&A. But,
yeah, it's like that thing where it's like, well, technically Reddit has a thing where it's like, well, it's ask me anything, or you can ask me almost anything, or right. It's like participants tend to like.
Ask me anything that I haven't signed a non-disclosure agreement
exactly.
about.
Don't ask me, don't ask me about court cases I may be involved in, or old accusations, or like the plot of the next Star Wars movie. But none of that obviously was anything that Gareth Edwards was being asked. But mostly it was like spoilers for anything that he could possibly spoil. And I think a lot of people are still kind of a little annoyed that this forthcoming Blu-ray set of Rogue One will not be containing any kind of commentary or deleted scenes. And now I don't know why he spoke on the commentary. I don't think he actually did one for Godzilla either. So maybe it's just not something, maybe he's just not a person who likes to sit and talk about movies.
Yeah. Well, and as we've talked about before, the industry seems to be moving away from those anyway. So
yeah. Well, anyway, a lot of it is just the idea that he said a lot of the deleted scenes weren't finished because they were cut early on, or
right.
They had decided to move in a different direction. So we're going to be watching unfinished footage. And I think that, I honestly don't really, it's, when they showed all these great deleted scenes from the original trilogy, most of the footage was finished because they had to. It was like, it was in camera stuff. But like I said, I think as time went on, for the prequels, there were less and less deleted scenes. And then subsequently, on the Force Awakens, they did that weird thing where they kind of released deleted sequences in drips and drabs, which I guess now is, since we're right in the middle of talking about Rogue One, I can let out a little confession. I actually caved in this week and I bought the Force Awakens quote collector's 3D edition. Because it was on sale, and I was like, everybody remarks about how great the 3D is. I have yet to actually try it out, but I did go watch the deleted scenes, which I think the big one takeaway was the Unkar plot subplot. Ugh, that's an awkward way of saying it. It was Unkar plot, where he shows up and he gets spoiler, he gets his arm ripped off by Chewbacca. And really, to be honest, I think I saved you $20 on that by you not needing to see it. But even with that, the Unkar plot, the CGI face it's not film ready. You can tell that the textures of the skin that they did, I don't know if it's what's his face. I'm blanking. Simon Pegg. I don't know if it's Simon Pegg in that version of it, or he does the voice or whatever. But it's like definitely not worth it to just buy. I haven't listened to the commentary or anything, so I'm, I guess I just wanted to confess that I'm like, after all my complaining, I just went out and did it because it hit $22.99, and that was my price point. And it's like, and you get it. It's a nice package. I will say it's the problem. It's the problem with any physical copy of anything now. When you open it up and like the discs are shaking loose inside the box, and it's like, I wish they had figured that out. But I don't know if I'll even bother to go through and do a review of that. But that I feel all right about it, because I know I'm not going to have to do a Rogue One collector's edition. At least I don't think I'm going to, since they're doing a 3D package right off the bat. Actually, they're doing like 5 different versions or something like that. It's like, oh, you've got the Target one and the Best Buy one and the Steelbook one. So
yeah, Rogue One seems like, if this were even 10 years ago, I could see them making not even necessarily different versions, but putting out different covers, different, Blu-ray DVD covers with each of the characters,
Yeah, I don't
because
really.
it's
I don't know much
more of
about
a group effort.
Yeah, the retailers actually. I think actually the Target one has like exchangeable cards. I think that's how they're actually doing something very similar. But I think it's the home video issue where it's more and more it's people are thinking. I mean, I know you're not actually a person who collects movies or buys movies on by and large, right? But
yeah, for the most part, yeah.
But you're still.
I'm trying to limit the amount of stuff that I will have to move eventually.
And you're a DVD person anyway, so
yeah. For the moment, I'll probably get a Blu-ray player eventually.
Right.
But again, let's wait till because I know I'll at some point I'll be moving out of here because I'm still renting.
Right.
So it's like, well, why buy more stuff that I'm just gonna have to pack up again anyway? So.
Well, I mean, I think that's my thing. It's like I really do feel like for the minor inconveniences and the occasional compression artifacts that you might see on like an iTunes thing. It's like honestly, physical copies. It's like such a the funny thing is now I've got 2 copies of The Force Awakens on Blu-ray that I don't need. It's like because obviously I'm going to go through the extras and the 3D on this new edition, but yeah, generally my actual copy of The Force Awakens Blu-ray has been in a player once because it's all digital copies now, and I don't have the greatest internet, but it's fast enough where on my TV it looks good enough for me, and I actually used to be I used to think of myself as a kind of a stickler for a good picture or whatever, although I think I'm not like one of those DVD reviewers of yore where they would talk about smearing and dot crawl and whatnot, but it's I don't know. My point is, I will just a show note. We're doing this a little earlier than usual, so I'm a little bit punchier.
Yeah,
John, save me, John.
Well, so as we kind of, I don't know that we alluded to this, but we mentioned earlier, sometimes people do these, Q&As, AMAs, where maybe they can't reveal everything. Frank Oz was recently asked whether Yoda or Yoda's ghost, Force Ghost, I guess, is going to be in The Last Jedi, and he basically said, "I'm not allowed to say. They've told me not to say whether he will be or not." Which, maybe, this is we don't want to say because we don't want to give people any kind of hint as to what this movie will or won't be. But I mean, it's basically saying, yeah, it's pretty possible, right? At the very least, that we'll get to see some evidence of Yoda. He'll be back. Some blogs will pick that up and say, oh, Yoda will get to be kind of not salvaged, but redeemed after the prequels. Because the last time we saw Yoda, well, technically the last time we've heard Yoda's voice is in Rebels. But for most people who were going to see The Last Jedi, the last time they saw Yoda was in the prequels, when it was not Yoda's finest moment as a character, and also as a CG character, right? Like the prequels Yoda was shall we say off model in a lot of ways. So I mean, how would you feel about? I mean, my only thing with Yoda is that I'm worried that like they're trying to throw too much into The Last Jedi. And just kind of, you want to connect back to these earlier eras, and there are different ways you can do that. But at the same time, like, let's keep the focus on these characters we have here with us, and how much of this is going to be. Well, we put Yoda's ghost in there because Rian Johnson just always wanted to put Yoda in a movie, and now he's getting to. Versus like, okay, how much is this going to fit, and how much of this is going to how much of this is not going to feel superfluous. But that's kind of my that's my fretting about new Star Wars, I guess. But how would you feel if Yoda or Yoda's Force Ghosts showed up?
Well, I mean, it's like at first I was like, well, of course, it's a foregone conclusion because in my mind, I think that I've kind of been gearing up for this. I mean, we've heard tale of Hayden Christensen traveling to London, Hayden Christensen working out with trainers or whatnot, and it's kind of like, well, that's interesting. Why is he doing this? It's like if he's not, I will, now knowing how to the extent that they made the principles of the original trilogy, hit the gym for relatively minor roles, even like, Carrie Fisher, it was like she had a personal trainer, she was required to lose weight and all this stuff for, basically a scenes where she didn't have to, there was no action. It was just her walking from one console to the next or, so it could totally mean the Hayden Christensen's in there hitting the gym, getting bulked up or whatever for what was tantamount to like a minute-long sequence, of him coming back as a ghost.
Right.
So it's like I kind of knew that this is going to be a thing that's going to, I don't know if Ewan's going to come back or they're going to CGI Alec Guinness or it's hard to know exactly how they're going to deal with this, other than to know was pretty sure that this was going to be something that they were going to revisit. It does give me pause in the sense that, a lot of people were kind of complaining that Star Wars is kind of almost stuck in a kind of a strange nostalgia loop where it's like you release The Force Awakens, which, one of the major criticisms would be that it's so samey to A New Hope. And then, Rogue One comes out and people are like, yeah, it was fun, but it is completely built on your nostalgia for the, again, for A New Hope as being kind of a linchpin, even though it's thematically and it's darker or whatever, it still has to rely on previous movies to really make sense to the people watching it. So it kind of doesn't jive well with this idea that like, oh, we're just making we're making the Ice Storm, but in space, that kind of like, oh, we're making an indie movie. I think the Ice Storm was a Fox movie. I don't think it was actually an indie movie, but what I mean? Yeah. It's like some Richard Linklater type film being made in Dubrovnik and in England. It's like, oh, but really if it's like, well, really thematically it ties very well into the other movies. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. So it's that idea where it's like, well, part of me hungers for them to show you where the Star Wars can go in the future, because, there's a lot of talk that, where this 8 and 9 after that, they're going to kind of retire the Skywalker line of Star Wars storytelling and go more towards this maybe one-offs or trilogies that aren't related to the original trilogies. Mm-hmm. And I'd almost like to see maybe a taste of that in this thing, but that's not to say that they can't have one foot in the future and one foot in the past. I wonder if that's going to, in some ways, make the different, any kind of changes he wants to do, any pushing forward, make it seem weird in comparison. It's like, well, they're trying to serve two masters in one movie, but again, I haven't seen any footage. I don't know what the story is. I'm just going off of, rumors, and I actually meant to kind of go back and, revisit Rian Johnson. I've never seen The Brothers Bloom, which people say is really good. Looper was a movie I didn't like the first time I saw it, and then actually enjoyed it a lot more. But I think that has a little to do with Joseph Gordon-Levitt's kind of his take on trying to impersonate Bruce Willis, throwing me off the first viewing. It was kind of like, it was like, oh man, he's trying a little too hard, which is, he's a good actor, but I just finished the Oliver Stone movie Snowden, and he does, and I don't know why I'm talking about Joseph Gordon-Levitt, but it doesn't matter. He does, it has nothing, he's not going to be in Star Wars, guys. I'm off the ranch. But my point is he adopts his kind of this cadence that.
Mm-hmm.
So my point is if any problems, it's mostly with Rian Johnson's movies. It's with the performances therein, not necessarily his directing style. So again, he's not said much of anything about it. I'm obviously just kind of trying to riff off of what Oscar Isaac had said. I think Laura Dern had remarked that she's almost kind of like giddy with like, oh, how are we getting away with this? Which makes me like that's a weird, and that's, I don't know if that's a direct quote, and I don't want to look up the quote, but it was in that spirit, kind of like giggly, kind of, we're getting away with this, and that kind of stuff makes me a little nervous about. Because it's like in some ways we just assumed that episode 8 was going to be great because Rian Johnson's he's a director and he's a smart director and he understands film, but then it's like it's almost like we kind of give him a pass on this, and we've been very hard on the Lord and Miller for anything about the Han Solo movies, and we were very anxious about Gareth Edwards. And it's like almost like I feel like we're giving Rian Johnson a pass just because he's even though he doesn't give out a lot of information, he's been very demonstrably, likable. I guess his persona has been that he's a very whereas I think guys like Josh Trank or whatever who was going to make the quote, maybe the Boba Fett movie. It's like he was more of a kind of a unknown quantity when he would be doing his public Twitter or whatever. Rian Johnson seems to be very manicured and thoughtful in what he thinks, obviously, because he probably can't tweet Jack without the Lucasfilm legal team going over it in triplicate and, making sure there's not an issue with like, oh God, there's a script page sitting on the table that we took the picture of. And actually the megapixels are so high, someone could zoom in and like read the last chapter or the last page of the script or whatever. But I don't know. It's maybe it's that thing where I always need to be quote worrying about a Star Wars movie. But now I'm like, in some ways, my worry has now moved back to Episode 8. I'm not really worried about the spin-offs. Not really worried about the future. I'm kind of just worried about the present because it's like we're 5. What month is this? Is it the third month?
This is March.
So we're 9 months away. I guess 9 months is nothing in the movie world, but it's like I kind of want a teaser. I guess I want a teaser. I guess I'm gonna have to say, oh God, I'm sorry. What's Kylo Ren's name? What's his real name?
Oh, Ben.
No, you do this to me every time.
Adam Driver.
Adam Driver. Yeah, Adam Driver's point where he's like, oh, we shouldn't even show a trailer. It's like I don't know, man. I think I'm going to need a trailer. I think I'm going to need some kind of trailer. It's like I can't.
Yeah, no.
Sorry, go ahead.
No. Go ahead. Finish your sentence.
No, I just need to have it be like, okay, this feels like Star Wars. This isn't going to be, like a Richard Linklater type kind of like, it's a interpersonal drama about a family and loss. Right. It's like, no, I need the John Williams swell. I need the mystical, I need, believe it or not, I actually need to hear Luke say something in the trailer that's going to be in the movie. Not like these platitudes that like turned out not to be a part of anything. It doesn't have to, I assume we're going to see that Who Are You or whatever, kind of riffing going on like we did before, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just a person I have to worry about something. I can't just be like, oh, don't worry, it'll be fine.
Well, I mean, I think one of the interesting things too, and this kind of speaks to what we were talking about with Gareth Edwards as well, is that and his comments about how late in the game those that Darth Vader stuff came into play is, when we first heard about these standalone movies, there was a lot of like, well, I don't know what we really need to expect out of these, and they're experiments, and there are these kind of genre experiments, and how is that going to work? And I mean, Rogue One for the most part worked pretty well, at least in terms of making people comfortable that okay, they can do this, and they can make a slightly darker, more intense. Maybe darker is not the right word, but a kind of a more dire, a Star Wars movie where
it's a bit bleak.
there's a few there's a few jokes, but not a lot, and then everyone dies in the end. Or at least all your favorite character, the main characters die in the end. And the fact that Kathleen Kennedy, some of the, I don't know that you and I had expressed these ourselves, but I think some people thought, well, it's Disney who owns it now, so how much of that are we really going to get, and how much experimentation are we really going to get? And they're going to want to make it, a Disney. They're going to want to Disneyfy it. And Kathleen Kennedy at least seems pretty open. I don't know that she's going to greenlight everything and every idea, but she seems pretty open to those kinds of pitches that are a little different. And the fact that Rogue One worked as well as it did, I think, at least for myself and probably other Star Wars people too, fans too, is like, okay, the Han Solo movie, they're saying they're breaking all the rules, whatever. We'll see how that goes. They're kind of off doing their thing right now. But maybe it's these episode number movies that are like, well, where are they going to take this thing? It's really, considering how The Force Awakens was set up and was, explicitly referencing so many of the original trilogy stuff. Once you move beyond that and you bring in a new creative team who, is saying, okay, we're going to experiment a little more with that, then it becomes like, well, maybe this is where we don't really know what to expect. And this is where we think, because our expectations are not that this is where they're experimenting. These are kind of the genre takes, and we're going to kind of see what happens and see what's viable. That's what those standalone movies are. That's not what these were supposed to be. And so to hear that more of that's coming in, it's kind of like, well, then what are we doing here? Like, what should we expect? And having that uncertainty, I think it's reasonable then that you and me to a certain extent and others would be a little nervous about it, maybe.
Yeah, it's just that, it's that kind of thing where everybody's like, experimental almost seems to be kind of like the rallying cry when people talk like, oh, we're not part of the main thing and we can try. I guess I'm just reiterating your point, but it's like, yeah, Rebels, like, well, we can do different things. And it's like, we can do different things with the comics. We can do different things with the books. And it's like, and we're going to do different things with the, with the saga movies. Like, well, it's okay. So then you're just saying you want to do things differently.
Right.
It's like, well, okay, well, I guess I'm all right with that. But then it also kind of, it's that whole thing where it's like, yeah, well, after 40 years, it kind of starts to make you realize like, oh, maybe I'm a little bit more traditional about this stuff than I thought. Maybe I'm more conservative in what I want from Star Wars. But then again, they're trying to keep people, excited on, like, technically, this will be the 9th Star Wars movie coming out at Christmas. They do have to still have the burden of getting, people that don't care about Star Wars to go in and say, I'm going to go see the new Star Wars movie. So
right.
Maybe they're trying to go, hey, this isn't, if you've seen Star Wars and you think you've seen it because you watch it on Spike or whatever every holiday weekend, it's like, we've got new things, we've got new tricks to entice you. It's not going to be like, Michael Bay's Transformers movies where, as time goes on, they become in some ways more arcane and indecipherable, where it's like what the narrative is. It's like by the time like the 4th Transformers movie, that's the one that came with Mark Wahlberg, it's like it's almost become a complete, like, it's not even it doesn't even have a story anymore. It's just like a flashes of sounds coming out of people's mouths and images and, So I mean,
you'll just want to see robots fighting, right?
Right. And I guess that's in some good ways, this is Lucasfilm not wanting to become Transformers, where it's like, well, if you don't understand, who the Chosen One is and what a midichlorian is, or, the Old Republic or the Sith Lord or Cad Bane or, well, no, not Cad Bane, but Darth Bane is, you're basically going to be sunk. So, maybe I should just be like, okay, it's not gonna, when they say experimental, I mean, come on, it's Star Wars. When it's like when they say like, oh, Rogue One's gonna be dark, it's like, yeah, we watched it, and I would admit that there's a certain nihilistic, almost dark ending. Well, before Actually, well, the whole thing.
I mean, it's about hope, but it's, it's a movie about hope in which, again, all of the kind of main characters die, and it's a war movie, right? Like, we'll just say that it's a war movie.
Exactly. So, but even then, it's not like going and watching, I don't know, All's Quiet on the Western Front or whatever, it's not that kind of dark. So, when they say experimental, I guess we're thinking, a $4.5 billion company that makes a product. When they say experimental, they don't mean like, it's not going to play in, it's not going to play well in Japan, kind of like reinvent the wheel kind of thing. It's like I guess they know their audience. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
So,
while I was out of town, I guess. Well, actually, let's keep it with movie stuff.
Okay.
So last week, we talked about how the Han Solo movie was going to be filming on Fuerteventura, which is one of the Spanish Canary Islands, and that's all we knew at that point. And so we were kind of speculating, based on the terrain and the climate and everything, what would we be, what would Fuerteventura be turning into, and what of the island would they be using? Well, now it turns out that, or at least the rumor is that Fuerteventura may be a stand-in for Corellia, which, Han Solo is from Corellia. You have the Corellian corvettes. Who else is from Corellia? Corran Horn. That's an EU character, but Wedge, I think, is from Corellia. My personal favorite, Corellian Boshek, is from there. And so this is kind of a pretty major planet in Star Wars lore that hasn't never been shown before. And so this may be where we see it, which, if this is a young Han Solo movie and he's from Corellia, it makes sense that we would see at least a little bit of it. So I wasn't like too shocked about it. What's interesting to me is that it also may, we may be throwing out some of the EU stuff in terms of what planets look like, not just, what characters do different things and who's there. But, so they're filming specifically, according to this, and this was like the Fuerteventura like tourism board put out this article that mentioned Corellia. So they said the Lucasfilm will be filming specifically in, and I'm not going to pronounce this right, Jandia National Park, and that park, it's an island, so there's a beach aspect to it, but then, there are some mountains, or I don't know if they're technically mountains, but the largest peak, the highest peak on the island is in this national park, and so, you've got the forests or whatever you have, leading up the side of the mountain, and then you have the beach, so there are multiple locations where they could be filming. Currently, Wikipedia lists Corellian terrain as a mix of forests, jungle, and of course an urban environment. So maybe the forests would be consistent, but I don't remember hearing a beach anywhere listed about Corellia where Han Solo grew up. I don't know that matters. That really doesn't matter to me whether they contradict previous descriptions of Corellia or not, but we just have a little more information. I mean, how do you feel about the fact that this could be Corellia? We could finally be seeing Corellia now.
Well, I definitely is a planet that has loomed largely in the mythos of Star Wars, but has yet to be. I don't think that, except for the books, I don't think even Corellia was maybe Corellia was depicted in maybe the Dark Empire series, but I also think that might have been Nar Shaddaa, which is I know there were references to it in the X-Wing novels because you had several people in those novels who were from Corellia and had worked like Corellian security, and so I don't know that they were ever there specifically, but you got kind of a flavor for it. So this says, so apparently it's mentioned in Catalyst, which I don't remember, but it's just mentioned. It's mentioned in Tarkin. It's mentioned in A New Dawn. So this is only the canon material. It's mentioned in Heir to the Jedi. It's
life debt apparently, but I don't remember. I don't remember that, and I don't remember it being in any of the Aftermath books. But that could just be, Wedge thinking about talking about Corellia. I don't know. In the EU, the Legends material, it showed up, and here I'm just reading from Wikipedia. The Knights of the Old Republic and the Old Republic video games. You have.
Yeah, it's a big thing.
You have a lot of mentions, but I don't know that aside from maybe a couple of video games, you don't see a ton of.
It's one of the planets on one of the what I call it SWOTOR or whatever. That's actually one of the games.
I guess the Millennium Falcon novel might have.
Oh yeah, I never read.
Oh,
that.
I guess what is it? There's that Han Solo trilogy where they go to Corellia. One of the books is even called Ambush at Corellia.
Yeah.
That's the one with the Thraken Sal Solo trilogy.
Right. So yeah, I mean,
it's just been ages since I've read that.
I mean, I guess the long story short is it's one of these things where it's been depicted in art and media forever, but never shown. It's kind of like Kashyyyk was kind of. When we found out that we were going to see Kashyyyk in episode 3, I think a lot of people were really excited. But the funny thing is that, I actually had seen the way my conception of Kashyyyk was very similar to the Star Wars holiday special, because it was basically like tree houses and the mythology was that Wookiees never even went to the ground on. It was kind of like almost like an organic Coruscant where it's instead of being a planet covered with a city, this was a planet just covered with one large forest of interconnected trees, and they were so massive that they actually had places to land your ship on them, and you never only it was very perilous to actually go to sea level or whatever, and then to have episode 3 be like, oh, there's a battle at a beach bunker, and you're like, oh well, that's not how I saw it. But
Beach Bunker Battle was my favorite Frankie Internet movie, by the way.
But it's like, that's that thing where you just go like, well, I guess I have to let them, if they have a more interesting idea. And of course, seeing this Fuerteventura, yeah, it looks like a very touristy kind of almost, the pictures I see are there's not a lot of buildings, but of course those things can all be added later. It's like, if it's a hybrid of kind of like, it kind of looks like it could easily, without water, they could add, make it look like Dubai with a mixture of, beaches and large scale buildings. So, just because Fuerteventura doesn't depict that doesn't necessarily mean we're not going to see a traditional kind of conception of Corellia as being kind of a hybrid between a moderately sized city with a kind of a rural background. But then again, they might want to go, hey man, I don't want to have to lock into something that was in a comic book or a novel 15 years ago. And maybe this story in some ways parallels Luke's kind of early days of being kind of stuck in a go-nothing small town and wanting to, break out. I mean, like I said, I don't know. I have no idea what Lord and Miller's conception of the Han Solo character. I mean, they only have to get the character to end up like he is in A New Hope. They don't have to necessarily make him like that off the bat. So it'll be interesting about, that recurring theme of kind of small town boredom, of being kind of trapped in your situation, which, at least if it's not, it's at least in the, it's always in the first movie of the trilogy. Obviously New Hope, Luke doesn't like where he's at. Force Awakens, Rey doesn't like where she's at, Phantom Menace, Anakin doesn't like where he's at, and it's all kind of similar. Well, if not the actual the same place, it's a very similar kind of idea where it's like, it's a paradise to some, it's a kind of a trap to others or whatever, Of course, I never ever heard anyone lament that, like, Tatooine. It's like, come on now. Tatooine might not be fun for a kid, but it's a great place to raise them. Like, I don't think anybody ever tried to sell Tatooine on that. So I don't know.
Right.
I don't know how much these things kind of influence it, but it is kind of interesting that how, even with Rogue One, we introduce our main protagonists, even though we know later on that they weren't born in cities. They were born in cities or whatever. They lived in cities. But again, it's Iceland. It's a farm. It's like there's no neighbors. It's that kind of concept of, you're out in the middle of nowhere and you're plucked out of that. And that's part of the adventure. It's kind of almost thematically how Star Wars kind of does things now. So for them to kind of maybe that, Fuerteventura is only going to be getting, some additions, some fiberglass doorways, some CGI ships coming and going. They kind of just kind of make it look as it is now. That's totally a concept too. I don't think Lucasfilm is going to make them again.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing I was just thinking about. As you were saying all that, I wonder at what point they're going to find it advantageous to reuse designs from other movies, right? So, like with Rogue One, they have these beach troopers now. Fuerteventura's got a beach. Like, why not? I mean, maybe it might depend on the timeline and how old Han Solo is in this movie and whether the Empire exists or not. I have a feeling it will. Right. So why not put more beach troopers in this movie? Why, reusing these not reusing locations, but finding similar locations, right? Okay. So we've done a beach planet. We did a sand planet with Tatooine. Let's do another sand planet with Jakku, right? There's more than one desert planet in the galaxy. That seems reasonable. Sure. So, and you didn't necessarily reuse stuff from Tatooine because you had jumped forward in the timeline, but if you're around the same time, if you're, within 10, if you're still in the Imperial era, why not, take your beach trooper idea, make it look slightly older, change some of the gear and maybe the helmet, tweak the helmet a little bit. But, how much, I wonder, you were talking about kind of the similarities in the storytelling and, okay, you have to start in this place and leave. I wonder how that, at a certain point, they repeat themselves story-wise. At a certain point, I wonder, are they going to say, well, we can't just keep spending money to make entirely new Stormtrooper costumes every year, right? Like, that's just crazy. Let's try to keep costs down. And, yeah, we have a new beach planet. Let's maybe tweak our beach trooper uniform, and that way there are even more kind of thematic, or not thematic, but visual echoes across our movies, right? So even though Rogue One and the Han Solo movie are very, very different story-wise, you still get the sense that they take place within the same universe, right? I mean, I don't, in terms of, the storytelling echoes, I just wonder to what extent they're going to have visual echoes, not in the sense of like, okay, let's design a new cargo ship that kind of reminds people of the X-Wing or whatever.
Right.
But, okay, let's just let's see U-Wings all over the place now. Or, let's see Y-Wings more than, because those were kind of, by the time you get to A New Hope, at least in the Legend stuff, I don't know if they're still holding to this, but, by the time you get to A New Hope, the Y-Wings kind of older, or at least the Y-Wings that the Rebellion has are a little older. Some of the outside, hull has been stripped off a little bit. The engines are a little more exposed. Let's see more Y-Wings in older. Let's have Han Solo fly a Y-Wing just for the hell of it. Why not do that? And then that way we can keep that kind of Star Wars feel, even as the stories are very different. Because previously, what's kept it feeling like Star Wars is these story echoes, right? That, Anakin's rise and fall is kind of an inverse of, whatever. And, you have Luke and then you have Rey,
Right.
So if we're not going to do those with the standalone movies, then maybe we make more visual echoes and we just start, once we've designed some things, let's just start putting them in multiple movies rather than have to start from scratch every time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a one way of doing it. It's kind of like, again, you can be experimental in your storytelling and then come back to once you kind of operate in a certain framework, then people might be more amenable to change if a lot of the trappings are the same. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I honestly don't feel like that, money is a concern for these movies and the idea, but
right.
I could be completely wrong. There could be that idea of like that, I don't know how business works on this thing, but they know it, like Fox had this issue with the Planet of the Apes films. Like, yeah, the first one came out and it cost, $10 million to make, but they were also like, but they it was a hit, but then they consequently every single sequel until they, rebooted it with Tim Burton had been a diminishment in the amount of money that they were willing to spend, because conventional wisdom was always that sequels have diminishing returns. It's like people, you can never get people as excited, but it's like, I think that they've kind of cracked the code on getting people to stay interested in something by not necessarily increasing they just because of inflation, they have to increase the budget, but adjusted for inflation, it's all probably, well, compared to, I don't know. I mean, that's the thing. It's like the original Star Wars was like $12 million,
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess I was thinking, that, John Knoll's original pitch for Rogue One was, let's make this as low budget as we can. Like, let's see how little money we can spend and still make a Star Wars movie that looks good. And so, if another pitch comes along like that and they go, yeah, let's do that. And let's really hold to that. And the director we bring on board is on board with that. And heck, let's shoot a Star Wars movie completely in black and white, or, let's try to keep this as minimalistic as we can. They have ways now to do that without just saying, okay, well, we're going to make this a coming of age, Joseph Campbell, kind of thing.
Yeah, I kind of hope they never get into that, though, because then you basically end up in this idea of like, I never saw this movie, only because a friend of mine that reviewed movies, she disliked it so much, she actually would use it as an example of a movie that's like, she couldn't even make it through, called New Rose Hotel, which was the guy, Abel Ferrara, I think is his name. He's a kind of a cult director. He did like Driller Killer and, famously, he did Bad Lieutenant with Harvey Keitel, a very transgressive guy. But the whole point of it is it was such a low budget movie, and had like Christopher Walken and Ozzy Argento in it. And it was like basically everything took place off screen, and they would they would leave the hotel, and then things would happen, and they'd come back and talk about what had happened in the hotel. And I always think of like, that is like so cheap,
Yeah.
But the idea of kind of having like a bottle episode of a Star Wars movie, like, to me, that honestly, I feel like that is when they've pushed the envelope too far. That kind of, Star Wars doesn't really, in my mind, doesn't exist as like quiet conversations in cockpits, as much as they'll try to sell you like, oh, most of this is conversations in cockpits, I don't think that that's where Star Wars necessarily, well, I mean, it can, but it doesn't necessarily going forward work. It's kind of like, I hope they never try to reduce, like, oh, let's get it down to the cheapest we can get it and see, how little we can give them and still call it a Star Wars movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't
So
understand.
you don't want Corellians and cockpits getting coffee?
No, I don't. I do not. I just have this vision of a Jeff Garlin in the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon. What do you want? Let's go.
Yeah, they could get him to do a voice in a Star Wars movie. It would be fine. It would be a little recognizable.
I just want someone to eat bantha cheese with.
Yeah. Oh, so here's a throwback. I can't remember what I was watching or something, but like one of the bridges came up, and I just remembered the old Eagle Heart line about Bo Bridges' jowl cheese. I just cringed again all over.
I was actually it's funny. Bo Bridges came up. I was watching because I guess Jeff presented John Goodman his Hollywood Walk of Fame star or whatever, and he did it as the quote. Everybody's like, he's doing it as the dude, and it's like he didn't really. He kind of was half and half. No, and I'm like, all of a sudden, it's like I said to my wife, I go, when did Jeff Bridges become Bo Bridges? It's all of a sudden you look at him and it's like,
yep.
I bet you anything Bo Bridges now is like, their dad. And now I've completely blanked on his dad's name. He used to be the star. That's what happens. You go from being the A number one to being some podcast dude can't remember your name.
Lloyd Bridges.
God.
Yeah. He's got the eyebrows for it.
Exactly. Well, heck, as we all get older, we all got the eyebrows for it. Yeah. Trust me.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So I the Aftermath novels came up a minute ago. I read Aftermath, Empire's End. Let's get to this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it because there are plenty of reviews out there, and I also don't know that it merits a big long review, which is not to say I completely disliked it. I thought it was fine. This is the third book in the Aftermath trilogy written by Chuck Wendig. First you had Aftermath, then you had Aftermath Life Debt, and here's Aftermath Empire's End. I thought the first Aftermath was okay. I disliked Life Debt a good amount, and I'm back to Empire's End is back to like, yeah, this is okay. The events, I guess, just briefly of this book, it's kind of what we were hurtling towards at the end of Life Debt. In Life Debt, there is an attack on the New Republic government, by kind of the remnants of the Empire led by Gallius Rax. And we get hints that we're going to find out, there's this mystery about who Gallius Rax really is. He just kind of started appearing in photographs or whatever their version of photographs are, of the Emperor and his cadre. He just started appearing at some point, and so he didn't really seem to have a history. And so basically this novel was being set up as, okay, you're going to get the backstory on Gallius Rax, and perhaps even more importantly, the Battle of Jakku, which is kind of the final battle of this rebellion era. And even though they had set up this New Republic government, that's kind of the Empire's last stand. And so that was definitely coming in this book, and we got it. I guess I said I just thought it was okay. I mean, it might even be the best of the trilogy. Wendig's writing, maybe that's just that I've gotten more used to Wendig's writing style, and I thought it was fine. It was less intrusive than previous things, although it just needed more editing. Like his writing style is fine, but as a writer, it was a little sloppy. And even, I mean, this is kind of nitpicking, but even minor stuff like, Gallius Rax. So Ray Sloane has kind of been stripped of her rank, not really stripped of her rank, but she's basically a lame duck. She has no real power in the Empire anymore. So she shows up on Jakku chasing Gallius Rax, and he says, "Welcome to Jakku, Ray Sloane. Welcome to Jakku." And then later, someone else kind of, I guess, joins. So this will be a minor spoiler. Singer Rathvelis, who is a former Imperial loyalty officer who had been working with Nora Wexley, he actually ends up becoming one of Mon Mothma's advisors, official advisors in this book. And so then this is later in the book, and she says, "Oh, welcome to the New Republic, Singer Rathvelis." but without saying like "Welcome to the New Republic," right? So just like you could have had this nice echo and this nice kind of symmetry in how the writing was, but it wasn't. It was just kind of like, oh, it just needs to be a little cleaner and a little tighter, and the writing would have been so much more effective. And to that I'll add, there are connections to the Shattered Empire comic, in that you have these kind of sentinel droids that the Emperor started built. There's these big red. They kind of look like the Emperor's Royal Guard, except instead of the helmets, they're droids, and so they have this kind of clear or shiny blank face that then the Emperor's face projects onto. So it's like you're getting a message from the Emperor himself, kind of. So those show up in Aftermath Empire's End as well. And once that happened and I made that connection, there's also a connection to the Lando comic, because in the Lando comic, if you haven't read it, Lando is, he takes this job to earn credits to pay back a debt. He doesn't know what the job is. It turns out he ends up stealing one of the Emperor's ships full of Sith art. So it turns out that there are many of those ships, copies of those ships around that the Emperor just keeps, and they all have like different things in them. They have different purposes, but having those echoes in there, I just kind of felt like, man, this really would have, the Aftermath series really would have been a lot better as a comic series.
Oh yeah.
And either directly tied into Shattered Empire or not, or just kind of that similar style, because even, Shattered Empire, it was 4 or 5 issues. I can't remember now.
I think it was 5.
And they had they had the same main characters in it, which was Shara Bay, Poe Dameron's mother. But she would like do different missions each time. So like the first issue, they were on Endor, and the second issue, she was helping Han Solo with his mission, and her husband was too. And then the third issue, she was helping Leia. And then, one issue she was helping Luke. And so you got kind of a picture of different things that were happening and what everyone was doing. And she was kind of the thread that connected all of them. And given that Wendig, wrote all of these interludes to kind of, as he puts it, kind of poke his head up and see what's happening around the galaxy. I mean, that really, it's very similar to what they were doing in Shattered Empire. And so I feel like if they had continued that, or just adopted that style and done it as a comic book, I think it would have been a lot more effective for me anyway. The other option would have been like, I mean, if Claudia had, especially when I got to the Battle of Jakku and the descriptions of the battle, is like, yeah, this is okay. He kind of glossed over a lot of that, and I don't know whether that was because we're going to see other elements of the Battle of Jakku in other things, and so he couldn't include them here, or if he was just like, it's the last third of the book and I have a lot of threads to wrap up. I'm not going to show you what happens to every single, Star Destroyer. I'm just going to focus on a couple of characters and what happens and the one thing that turns the tide, So, just thinking of Claudia Gray and her work in the Lost Stars novel and in, how she just wrote the Bloodline novel, just like, oh man, I just really wish if these were going to be novels instead of comic books, that kind of she had been able to take a crack at them. But it's obviously not my call to make. Other people may feel differently. They, in the first Aftermath, they were just kind of these random. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Sorry, you did cut out for a second.
No microphone detected thing. So anyway, so the interludes, in the first Aftermath novel, they just kind of felt random and they didn't really contribute to a cohesive whole of a novel. As he went through Life, Death, and then Empire's End, he's kind of stuck with those stories. And so they're still interludes, but they have kind of a beginning, middle, and end of the story now. Some of them I don't really care about, like, what happens to Cobb Vanth on Tatooine, and I don't know. I don't really care about that. Others might. Your boy Malik Killy, the Rancor keeper, he makes a cameo appearance in one of the interludes.
Jeez, really?
There is a interlude which we talked about before with Jar Jar Binks. I had not read it yet at that point. I've read it now. It's a little bit better than I expected. He's not so much a like. I guess he's kind of a down on his luck musician, but it's not as dire as all that. Although in some cases, I guess to a certain degree, what we get is a little worse because, and I'll just spoil this for people. So there's like this deformed orphan on Naboo who is like sad because he's the boy nobody wants. I guess deformed is too strong. He has some kind of scarring on his face. He's disfigured in some way. But that's it. And so he sees Jar Jar Binks kind of just hanging out, not doing much. He recognizes Jar Jar Binks. He's kind of scared to go up and talk to him because he's this famous person, but then he eventually does. And Jar Jar Binks can tell that this boy is sad and no one wants him. And so he, spends some time with him. He pays attention to him. He has fun with him. He does his goofy little tricks where he fills his mouth up with water and then shoots the water out of his ears, that kind of clown business. And he's like, oh, we're going to be pals, with this kid. So it's a bit maudlin. It's not quite as bad as, like Life is Beautiful or The Day the Clown Cried or whatever.
That's what I was going to say.
It definitely has those overtones to it, which is just like, oh, that's just, it's a little maudlin. It's a little saccharine. It's like, but it's certainly not like, hey, we're going to show Jar Jar Binks, in the gutter. It's not necessarily that.
Yeah. I think that's kind of what I think you're referring to my review of the thing that I hadn't read, and I kind of just went off on someone else's reportage. Good,
right? God
forbid.
Right. Well, so the reportage, I think, was misleading to me at least. The only other two things I'd mention is there's a pretty, and in a subsequent interview, Wendig has acknowledged that this is exactly what he did. There's some scenes and some imagery that are basically inspired by Mad Max Fury Road, which is fine.
It's inspired by a 2-year-old movie.
Right, yeah, like that's the thing. Given the timeline, like he obviously hadn't written those scenes yet. He like saw the movie and was like, "Oh, I want to put that in my book," and then he put it in his book. Which Star Wars and previous Star Wars novels have always contained references to other movies and other works of art. It just seems a little recent and like a little obvious. Like, oh, okay, yeah, that's the Mad Max Fury Road sequence. There's also, I don't know, he hasn't mentioned this, but there are some imagery that kind of reminded me of Hellraiser as well. So what I mean, what I mean by that is, in this book, we are introduced to Nema the Hutt, as in Nema Outpost on Jakku, which is just mentioned. There's just Rey throws out the name or maybe Han Solo just says like Nema Outpost. In reference to Jakku. And so that's a reference to Nema the Hutt, apparently, who we meet in this book. She's not, it's a she. Nema is not sort of big and corpulent as you might expect, if your comparison is Jabba the Hutt. And in fact, like everyone who sees Nema the Hutt in this book is like, oh, she's not as corpulent as I would expect a Hutt to be. She kind of slithers like a snake, so she's very like quick and whatever. But she has servants. Basically, anyone who comes to her who she isn't like hiring to kill someone, she ends up kind of enslaving, and then all of her other slaves turn the new person into one of them, where they're like. I get this is also a little sort of like the War Boys and Fury Road a little bit. But they're, like covered in white with like maybe red paint on their face. But there's one who's like full of just like hooks all over his body and face and whatever. And that I was like, that's a little Hellraiser.
That sounds a little bit like Ghosts, John Carpenter's Ghosts of Mars. Have you ever seen that?
Oh, that could be a reference. I have not seen it, but I could see that being a reference for him, for Wendig. so depending on how much you like that kind of stuff, the slave like torture stuff, it never goes as overboard. I also feel like, there are definitely some moments in this movie where like, oh, that's actually, there's one in particular where you go, oh, that's pretty violent, and it, yeah. So there's one thing in particular that's pretty violent, but overall, I felt like it wasn't quite as bad as Life Dead, right?
Yeah,
like
you were saying that was pretty gory, and there's a lot of body horror.
Yeah,
in it.
and this one, like I said, in Empire's End, there's like one bit that I think is pretty gory. So, and it doesn't have really much to do. It takes place in Nema the Hutt's dungeon or whatever she calls it, but it's not like these slaves who are full of hooks like tearing people's flesh off or anything. It's not that, but so that's Empire's End. Great. It's kind of nice. I enjoyed it in the sense that I was glad to see the story resolved and kind of know what happens. Oh, there's one other thing I forgot to mention. So at the very end of the novel, right, you have the Empire's defeated, but some of them are still around, and in fact, Ray Sloan is the one who's still around. You have Armitage Hux, who is what's his name? Donald Gleason's character in The Force Awakens. He's still around. His father might be still around, who's in charge of developing the new Stormtrooper program, whatever. So they basically, the remnants, the Emperor sends the remnants of whoever's left after this battle. Basically, they go to like the edge of the galaxy, or they might even go to some spot outside of the galaxy. Which on the one hand, and so I should say too, there's been speculation online now that like, oh, is that where they meet Snoke, and is that where Snoke comes from? I really don't care if that is or not. Right. It might be. We'll find out, or we'll find out at some point. And where Snoke comes from is so uninteresting to me at this point. But if it does, fine. It in some ways it kind of feels like cheating. Like, oh, then they just like leave the galaxy and then show up later. Because it feels like cheating, just like, oh, then they just leave the galaxy, right? It's sort of like that Poochie, like, my planet needs me, I have to leave now.
Exactly.
And I'm not sure how that jives with what we see in Bloodline, where we have all of these like collectors of old Imperial memorabilia and countesses and things who have lost their position once the Empire fell, who are trying to reclaim it. I'm not sure how that piece fits with the piece we get here at Empire's End, but it is also at the same time very reminiscent of one of the short stories in that Tales from the Bounty Hunters collection from 20 years ago now. The Zuckuss and Forlom story. It's actually the rebellion who goes to like just outside the edge of the galaxy to recuperate after the Battle of Hoth. Oh. That's like their rendezvous. So that is no longer canon. But at least that idea of like, oh, we're gonna pop just outside the galaxy where no one can find us. That it feels like cheating, but at the same time, it's an idea that's been around before. So I couldn't get too annoyed with it, but I was like, this feels a little like you just don't know what to do with these characters now, or you can't say what these characters are going to be doing, so you just kind of push them off to the side for however many years, and then they just suddenly pop back and are like, oh, by the way, we're the First Order now. So yeah, that's kind of the end of the book. And as I said, overall, I enjoyed it in the sense of kind of learning what happens, and I'm glad to know, like, okay, so the Battle of Jakku, this is what happened, and the Emperor's machinations for what happened after he died, and his contingency plans that he put in place. Like, that's kind of interesting. The ideas in it are kind of interesting, but just the execution of it, I'm like, I just wish it had been in someone else's hands, either as a comic or a novel.
Well, yeah, the one takeaway from your review is that the thing that you mentioned that kind of interested me was this idea that, and again, I guess it came up in the Lando miniseries, that the Emperor himself kind of keeps his good shit on like these boats, you know, kind of these space boats. And I was kind of thinking like, man, they kind of missed this great opportunity of kind of maybe doing kind of an interesting take on this post Return of the Jedi thing, where it's like, yeah, you know, there's a reference to, you know, Kylo Ren mentions how he gotten information about the map to Luke Skywalker, or at least most of it, from the Imperial Archives or whatever. And then it's this idea that like kind of the Emperor had kind of like, you ever heard of like this L. Ron Hubbard Sea Org?
No.
Now I'm paraphrasing. So if anybody of our listeners is a Scientologist, I apologize if I get this wrong. And I'm serious. I don't want to make fun of your faith, but so apparently though, like later in his life, L. Ron Hubbard, in order to kind of, because he was in conflict on taxes or something, he spent the later parts of his life on boats. He docked someplace until he absolutely had to. But I guess after he passed, that there's still these organizations, and they call it the Sea Org, and they're kind of like a navy that kind of protect his writings and stuff like that. So I guess there's some base out in the middle of California, but it'd be like this idea. It would be a great idea for a story about, you know, post Emperor, that people would be going out to try to find these boats or these ships with all these, like, you know, all the really good stuff that he had that he wouldn't have kept. I mean, it's similar to kind of what Timothy Zahn had had done with the idea of Mount Tantus and the Guardian of the Mountain. But it's like I think it would be kind of an interest. I mean, I guess this comes up in Shattered Empire, doesn't it? That they go to raid something before the... Yeah.
So one of the, I'm blanking on the name of it, but it was like Operation Cinder or something.
Yeah,
where basically he sends these Sentinel droids out and they give orders to different commanders. And so in Shattered Empire, a Star Destroyer goes to Naboo, and basically they send out these satellites that mess up all the weather, create all these storms to basically ruin Naboo. And they mention that this is happening around the galaxy at these other planets. Naboo, we can guess why. The others, either they don't mention specifically their names, or, you know, we don't know yet why those were of strategic interest or you know, vindictive interest to the Emperor. But yeah, like that kind of stuff, like, yeah, that was kind of, I'm with you. That was the thing of this novel that interested me the most, was the Emperor's contingency plans. And it seemed like he had multiple contingency plans for like different things happening. And like, yeah, I want to see more of that stuff. Like, I want to see like all the crazy crap that he had in place, you know, his machinations in case anything ever should happen to him, you know, okay, I'm going to strike back. I'm going to strike out. I'm going to, you know, punish my enemies and even, you know, erase my own history so that no one can find out what happened to me and who I was. Yeah, I would like to see more detail about some of those things. And even, you know, in Shattered Empire, again, we saw Naboo, we didn't really see others, and I want to hear more about that. And actually in Shattered Empire, Lando was who rescued Leia and Charabae at Naboo. And so, like, maybe that's a way to give Lando more to do. Like, maybe then he takes that on. And I'd kind of like to see that story of Lando, like, going around and cleaning up the mess that the Emperor is leaving after he dies. Like, that'd be kind of fun, right?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities to kind of show how, you know, but you know, George's take on the destruction of the Empire at the end of the special edition of Jedi is the fact that we were always ready to strike. All we needed was the sign from the rebellion, and now they're throwing stormtroopers up in the air and taking down statues spontaneously. Now that, you know, that's because he could just be like, okay, well, this is the last 3 minutes of my saga. Well, now that we've expanded and now Star Wars wants to be more complex, the idea of dismantling, a 30-year, it's like, I know that the Empire is not necessarily an analog for like the Soviet Union or whatever, but I mean, the idea is like, yes, they basically one day the Soviet Union said, yeah, we're going out of business basically, and things got torn down, but it took decades to kind of dismantle a lot of those old Soviet things, and some people would say that a lot of it actually still threads through the government. So it's kind of like, I would think that, it would be a great example of kind of like, you could tell it having a whole nother trilogy of like kind of, in the old EU, they'd always just refer it to the remnant and, the Imperial remnant. And they'd never kind of give you a good idea of how many people were in the remnant, because it was a way for them to always like, well, we need a bad guy for this trilogy of books. Let's throw in, Grand Moff, Johnson or something. Right. It's like he's been in the
some former admiral who has his own fleet. He has a couple Star Destroyers, and he's just kind of messing around with a couple of star systems.
Right.
And I think let's bring Admiral Dalla back, because we can't kill her off for it.
Exactly. And it's just like, I think it would be kind of interesting, like, even just a one book where it's like, we need to like, I don't know, the computer cores of all the old Jedi teachings are on these ships that he kept out. And, that kind of, I think that there's more to be worked with there. Maybe maybe it would be boring, but I mean, my takeaway, and again, I only read the first Aftermath book, so I probably shouldn't even be speaking on this. It's just, my takeaway from it was such a halting kind of, I don't know, a circuitous route of getting to like the good stuff that I just like, even in your review, it's like, there's very little there that made me go, oh man, I wish I had sat down and read these books. I really wish whereas I felt that, even though Bloodline wasn't perfect, I felt like in some of the time, I felt like the timeline was a little wonky. Like, oh, this is only 5 years before The Force Awakens, and they never quite explain why Han and Leia kind of had separated. But I felt like
and I mean, in this, I guess Han does do a little bit in this book, and you get a sense that he's kind of bored, and I mean, at this point, he's waiting around for his kid to be born, and he kind of can't really do much at this point. So Ben Solo is born at the very end of the book. But it's like the day that they sign the peace agreement is when, of course, Ben Solo's birth date.
Did droids help deliver the baby? Was the
probably
poopa,
probably
poopa.
I think they were on Chandrilla, but I can't remember.
Okay, they didn't go out to that weird place. Ironically, this is where you were born. Like, what?
Yeah, right. And then but yeah, I mean, there's even like political intrigue and like bombing of a building and similar stuff to what was in the Bloodline novel, and it's just like, this is too similar to Bloodline that I just wish Claudia Gray had written this instead of.
Yeah, well,
right, like there's a Mon Mothma gets a lot to do in this book, which I appreciated, like seeing her do stuff. Leia is pretty much sidelined. Han, he's mostly sidelined, although he kind of gets his feet wet of like helping with a stakeout of something related to that political intrigue plot. He helps tail someone, and then they fly the Falcon around a little bit, but for the most part, he's not a major factor. So it's so that's the Aftermath trilogy in a nutshell. It's like, there are some interesting story ideas and plot points in here, but just the execution of it is a little sloppy, I think.
Okay, so let's just do a little bit of comic news, and then we can finish off with our review of the newest Rebels. How does that sound?
Yeah, sounds great.
So basically, they've been kind of hinting for about 2 months that there was another Star Wars title coming. It was imminent or whatever. And I guess this early last week or late last week after we recorded the show, they kind of came out with what they're going to be doing. And it's another Darth Vader comic, which is kind of funny because they just after 25 issues wrapped a Darth Vader comic.
Right.
So it's kind of like, whoa, that's interesting. But I guess the difference with this is that this was... this is going to be set immediately after the events of episode 3. So, Vader's still got his wounds are still fresh.
He's learning how to be part man and part machine,
which I think was kind of explored in the book Lords of the Sith, which was which was even though it technically is part of new canon, it was kind of it was
one of the early.
Yeah, it was kind of early. It was almost like a bottle book in the idea that the things that happen on it, the things that happen during that story don't really feed into it, because I think that I think at the end of it, I think Darth Vader and they kill everybody on the planet or something like that.
Yeah, it was it was a holdover. It's considered part of the new canon just because it was released after that kind of arbitrary cutoff that they had.
Right.
It was in development before they, made the switch to, Legends and new canon. And I guess the other piece of it is that Anakin Skywalker wasn't Darth Vader for very long in episode 3 when it comes right towards the end. So he's still learning how to be a Sith Lord here. And, we've been told we'll get the origin story of his red lightsaber, which, okay. I get he'll need something.
Right.
Whether how that fact itself is not interesting. It's up to the writer of this comic to make it interesting. So we'll see. I don't know. I don't understand why they. I guess I kind of do. The other side of the story, I think, is that Marvel is starting their new line or their new. They're rebranding. So before it was all new, all different Marvel, and now it's called Marvel Now or something. And so they're having storylines wrap up, and then kind of old storylines wrap up, new storylines starting with a lot of their other titles, and so this maybe fits into that, right? So that was the all new, all different Darth Vader. This is the Marvel Now Darth Vader, which I guess it gives them a chance to put out another Darth Vader #1.
Yeah, that's kind of the cynical take on it. And again, it's it's most likely it's tied into this kind of, I'm no expert on comics, but every article I've read is that, Marvel and DC to some extent, are constantly in this kind of, well, you read those numbers, that's that website where it has a lot of numbers. That basically, in a lot of respects, Star Wars is carrying Marvel currently,
Right.
And again, I think I talked a little bit about this. Is at least from what I've read about the industry right now, it's kind of, we're caught between kind of wanting to attract a younger generation, more socially conscious storylines, more dialogue that reflects, at least what they feel, how young people talk now, or which you can't necessarily do with a
more
Star
diverse.
Wars. Yeah, more diverse, more that kind of thing. It's like Iron Man is now a 15-year-old woman of color, and just a lot of these kind of, they're trying, and that's the history of comics. They've, I was thinking about actually, and I don't think we're gonna have time to review it, but I would Afra 5 I had read in preparation for this episode. And it was and I enjoyed it. I'll give you, I'm all right saying that. I enjoyed 5, but it kind of reminded me of this book I had read about called Secret History of Marvel, where they had kind of had this thing in the 70s where everything got very all the writers had started getting stoned a lot at work, and all of a sudden it became the Silver Surfer with this cosmic idea mixed with this kind of traditionalist kind of cartoon, the Jack Kirby art. And it's also, it's Afra to me kind of has a little bit of that, but it also has some of that, I don't even know how to describe it, like the greasy kid stuff kind of dialogue.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of, they have to experiment a little bit with this, but Star Wars, I think, is kind of almost operates out of these concerns, but at the same time, while Marvel is kind of, at least from my takeaway, is that they actually they kind of want to bring it back, roll it back. Obviously, not roll it back to like 1988 or something like that, but maybe it was a little bit with some of the dialogue and some of the story beats is like maybe a little bit an edge of like too much, too fast, and that they're losing a lot of the core readers, which are older readers. So that, I don't know. I get the feeling that they're going to leave a lot of that kind of contemporary stuff kind of to the side for the time being. I mean, again, that doesn't really affect Star Wars, at least in what I've taken. I feel like they don't, that they're really, even when I feel like, oh, this doesn't feel like Star Wars, it's not because they're trying. I think it's mainly because they're trying to be experimental rather than trying to kind of shoehorn a contemporary narrative into a 40-year-old franchise. So, I mean, I don't know exactly what they're going to do. I mean, the one thing that you're not going to necessarily benefit from having this episode 3 is having kind of that fun back and forth with like Afra, because you can't bring Afra into it because Afra would be either a baby or not even born yet. So it'll be interesting how they move forward and not have it be kind of, it's like, well, they don't really. I
mean, I would imagine we would get more of Darth Vader with the Emperor, right? Or.
But how exciting is that going to be? You know what I mean? I guess that's my kind of point.
I guess I'm open to it being good. I'm not down on the idea, but I guess the worry is that it becomes sort of the mirror of Obi-Wan and Anakin, which was so talky and very little action, and even though that was a miniseries, I don't think they put it. I think this is going to be an ongoing, right. The new Darth Vader, and so maybe there will be more opportunities for that kind of stuff. But they brought Palpatine into that too, and had flashbacks to Palpatine kind of mentoring Anakin as a young lad, and I imagine. I mean, maybe this won't be the entire series, but I imagine we'll get a little more of that, right? Because again, this is kind of his training and being a Sith Lord, his training and figuring out how to be who he is in that black getup, building his red lightsaber or whatever. I mean, unless it's just all, I mean, unless this is like the backstory of his sort of infighting with Tag or Mahdi, like I don't. Yeah, they'll have to, if it's not that and if it's not him with the Emperor, they'll have to kind of put him up against external challenges. But then how do you make those external challenges interesting when you essentially know how this story ends? And the first Darth Vader comic found some ways to do that. One way it did that was to introduce a new character who was a hit immediately, and that helped a lot. But without that, I mean, unless they're just going to create, okay, well, here's, like you said, there's the earlier version of Afra. It's Afra's father, or something like that. This could be a tough go for them. I mean, I'm sure they're not. I mean, they must not be too worried about it because they went ahead with it. But I mean, there are a lot of ways that it could invite I mean, it's certainly going to invite comparisons with the first Darth Vader series, and those comparisons may not be favorable considering how much of a hit the Darth Vader comic was, and the character of Afra and all of that other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one way that they could make it really interesting and kind of not adhere, but kind of not lose some of the things that they tried with the original one. I mean, I guess like like Vader having an apprentice, like that idea that like maybe his first issue of like becoming a Sith is that he knows the rule of two, so he's got to start working on an apprentice himself, which would tie in nicely the fact that he's already taught somebody before. He was already had an apprentice, which is an idea that I resisted greatly because it's like I didn't really enjoy the young Ahsoka character. I liked her. She was more interesting as time went on. It's like that squeaky kid kind of thing I found really annoying. But if it's like this idea of like, well, Vader, again, it goes into that video game, the Unleashed game, where with Sam Witwer basically playing Star Killer, which was it's non-canon video game, but it's the idea that Vader has been training an apprentice in secret to usurp the Emperor eventually. And I mean, there's still some meat on the bone of that story, of the idea, like, all this time Vader is like, okay, I'm evil and I've killed all the Jedi and the younglings, but, I'm going to train like, a character, someone else that can be like a Sith Lord. And I think it would be, it'd behoove them to maybe think about, a female Sith Lord, because I mean that's something that they've tried many times to try to, and has never got past the concepts. And it always ends up being kind of like all their ideas get filtered into Asajj Ventress, who that's a character I'm kind of like done with. It never quite worked for me. It was like, okay, but that's a Clone Wars. That's mainly probably, it's like. So this idea of kind of like, okay, they can kind of do the Afra thing, but this person will be somebody like, like a young, like a 9-year-old, like that kind of idea of like, right. He thinks like, hey, this is all, in his, again, what am I doing? I'm writing this comic, but my point is that, he's angry, he's burned, he's destroyed, he's full of rage, and he's probably looking for someone to blame for this. And it's like, well, I can't blame Palpatine, because I'm going to end up yelling at him and he's just going to kill me. So I'm going to blame Qui-Gon Jinn. I'm going to blame Obi-Wan Kenobi for plucking me out of obscurity. And, when everyone else said I wasn't ready, you guys decided you were going to train me, and it's your mistake. So I'm going to fix it by finding somebody young, and I'm going to fix the mistakes that my teachers did, and I'm going to, you know what I mean? I think that might be interesting. That way we can kind of, his training can get filtered through this apprentice, and I don't know. I think it would be interesting that, maybe kind of, it would add some grit to the story of the, like, well, he's going to hide that he is an apprentice. Because I think did Vader not kind of let it slip that he was working with Dr. Aphra until like the very end, or was that something he'd been, I don't know if he'd been, I know that. I
think it was Aphra who kind of spilled the beans.
Oh yeah,
or
yeah,
whatever. Like she showed up at the end because she just kind of Palpatine was like locked away because of what Silo was doing, and then Aphra stumbles on him and is like, oh, by the way, Darth Vader is like who you should be throwing in with, and I'll take my leave of you now. So I don't think Vader ever divulged that to the Emperor. The Emperor might have known, right, or suspected, but I don't think it ever came out of Vader's mouth. Yeah, I mean, and the other thing that could be interesting is using this comic to start showing how, yes, it's Vader focused, but with the rise of Vader, you also are kind of planting the seeds of the rebellion or at least of, different rebel groups on different planets. And that Lords of the Sith book, it takes place on, of course I'm blanking on it. I just had it in my head. Yeah, Ryloth. Thank you. Right. And that was about, I mean, they went there, but it was, the Vader and the Emperor were also kind of stuck there, but it was kind of about the Free Ryloth movement, dealing with them, having them on the planet and kind of their battles and so you could use this comic as a way to show, like, okay, here's Vader learning how to be a Sith Lord and all of the darkness that entails, and here's the hope, here's the rebellion, the seeds of rebellion that he's planting in its wake, and use that to kind of grow. Maybe we'll see young Hera. I don't know. We'll see other planets, other groups, other people who may become more important to the Rebel Alliance later on, and see how they kind of see what Vader's doing and hear about what Vader's doing, and realize, like, oh no, this is not what I signed up for. Or I don't want to live under this. I'm gonna try to fight against it. So I mean, that's another direction they could take it as well.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's speculation, but something we actually know about would be the double Agent Droid, which is it's not even the penultimate episode, because I guess there's a two-parter that ends the season.
Well, yeah. So the next week is the Maul versus Obi-Wan episode, and then the finale is, I'm guessing, everyone, either the attack on Lothal or the confrontation with Thrawn at the very least. With Thrawn, and then our group of rebels here. So that's the 2-part finale. So yeah, next week is the penultimate episode, and that's the Obi-Wan versus Maul, which great. So Dave Filoni in Rebels Recon, he was like, yeah, I know half the audience is going to consider this a filler episode.
I saw that too.
Here's what happens in Double Agent Droid. So we have Wedge, we have Chopper, and we have AP5. They are flying to a planet, Killen Station is what it's called. And the planet looks really good. Again, the background artists, the people who do the work on the planets and the lighting and all that, like, they did a great job with this one too. Anyway, they're going there to infiltrate. Chopper's painted up in his Imperial droid paint, black and red. They're going to infiltrate the base and get Imperial codes they need so that they can attack Lothal. I guess attack the Empire on Lothal, try to free Lothal. Of course, they make everyone walk through sensors individually. Chopper triggers the sensor going into the base, which then gets relayed to, I think it's called like a listener ship or a listening ship,
right?
Which is full of Imperials, who many of whom are wearing the kind of Lobot style cybernetic thing that wraps around the back of their head. Some of them are wearing what look like, the sunglasses that old people wear when they drive that cover up like their, or maybe it's just the ones that you get when you get the eye drops at your optometrist appointment. Like, they're wearing those, so maybe they have some kind of visual enhancement sunglasses.
They're blue blockers.
Yeah. The leader of this group of Imperials is just known as Controller, who's voiced by Josh Gad. Yes, really. And so they get the signal that, the sensor went off. The controller is able to guess that, this droid is an older model. This may be, kind of the rebel spy we've been hearing about. Meanwhile, AP5 and Chopper fight like constantly in this episode. They get into a fight over who should be in charge. AP5 is like, well, they're up to be in charge. AP5 is the Alan Rickman droid that I've referred to previously. So they split up to try to get the codes. AP5 is able to download the codes, no problem. When Chopper accesses the data port, the Imperials are aware of it, and so they're able to use that connection to countermand his programming and basically take over. So it's a little bit like a Being John Malkovich situation where, the controller kind of sees what Chopper sees and is able to kind of speak for Chopper and do things and command Chopper to do stuff. But importantly, the controller is like, no, I don't want to contact Thrawn yet. I want to let the droids escape, because then we'll learn the location of their base, and then I can give that to Thrawn. So now Chopper's acting weird. He's not as finicky. He's just using Imperial code speak. AP5 recognizes that something's weird and that he suspects he may be acting as an Imperial double agent. he tells the ghost crew, no one really believes him except Hera kind of starts to believe him. So then they figure out that, yes, that is in fact the case. So the third act of the show is all about the ghost crew trying to stop Chopper from downloading the coordinates before the controller can get them. And uses Chopper to try to eject everyone out of the airlock. That doesn't work. There's all kinds of things that can happen. At which point Hera gets super mad that someone messed with her droid. Once they, figure out what happens, once they get access to Chopper, they use Chopper. So again, they put the connection back into the Ghost, hook Chopper up to the ship in some other way, and send a power surge back to overload the listening ship, which blows up the listening ship, but somehow does not affect Chopper in any way, except by returning him back to normal. I'm not really sure how you can have a power surge that blows up a ship, but not the droid that is acting as the conduit. But it's a space opera, space fantasy show. I'm not going to get too too up in arms about it. So that's the episode. A couple things to note here, and it's a couple of. It may be too extreme to say that this is a controversial episode, but I imagine this will be a divisive episode for two reasons. The first is that AP5 follows Wedge into the bathroom, or Wedge calls it the refresher, which I thought we were stopping that. I thought they had decided no, we're just going to call it the bathroom. But maybe they're still calling it the refresher. But wasn't there some novel that we read where they started calling things by their regular names instead of some crazy made up Star Wars name? And I thought refresher was one of those. Anyway,
yeah.
Wedge says refresher a lot. So Wedge is urinating at a urinal when AP5 walks in and interrupts him, and he's like, I was using the refresher, and then he's like, I can't wait to go back and use the refresher. So that I think, I feel like in some novels there may have been references to characters using the refresher to just to freshen themselves up, right? Splash some water on their face, whatever. But I think this is the first time that we've actually seen or even heard or read about a character actually using the bathroom. Am I wrong about that? Have there been other instances, or is this
I would say in the new, well, it's definitely the first time in the new canon, except for, obviously I can't be responsible for books, but anytime in a visually depicted medium, this is the first time that they've ever indicated that a Star Wars character would need to relieve themselves, and that relief, involves having a front pointing appendage front or whatever. Piece. Yeah, it's a front piece. Yeah. So they got something down there in Star Wars land. Hopefully, it's not something like that Borg gullet or whatever. But
oh yeah.
But you never know. All of a sudden, it's special edition. There's some vines coming out of his fly or something.
Right.
I actually noticed that when I was watching it too. I said to my wife, I think this is the first time they've ever showed anyone taking a piss in Star Wars. It's that was weird. Absolutely my first thought was wait a minute, they've never done this before. And again, we also what would it be? Would it be Paul Bateman that has this particular issue with Star Wars clothing now that he's maybe zippers? He's an anti-zipper guy, which I think
he just doesn't want them visible.
Yeah, he's he's the guy that does Star Wars Influences podcast over at Rebel Force Radio, and I think he lamented this thing where it's all of a sudden now there's all these open zippers in Rogue One, and it irks him. So it's another example of a zipper in maybe they stopped using zippers around the time the rebellion coalesces. Once around the time of A New Hope, they all opt not to use zippers anymore or whatever. I don't know. Sorry, that's not
zippers. So yeah, so that was kind of the first we've kind of crossed a barrier here. The other is that, so I mentioned AP5 and Chopper argue a lot in this episode. There's a point early on where they basically do verbatim that anything I can you can do, I can do better. I can do anything better than you. No, you can't. Yes, I can. No, you can't. Like they basically go through that verbatim. And then at the end of the episode, AP5 ends up shot out into space kind of on his own. And so he's floating in space and these little baby space creatures come floating up and he starts singing. And I don't know if he's continuing to sing that same song or if it's I think it is. It's like the end of that song. But he's very happy. He's all alone. It's quiet. There's no one telling him what to do. He doesn't have to listen to any dumb humans, or, other flesh-based creatures. So he's very content. And so he starts singing, which is then immediately followed by like a slapsticky moment where then they go back to pick him up. They have the little door open. He flies into the door and he disappears. And then you hear this clang. And then they immediately go back to AP5 and Chopper arguing, like for the last minute of the episode. So, I mean, the singing is the controversial part, but I mean, I thought I kind of rolled my eyes for two reasons. One is that, well, I guess the main reason was it's kind of been like Futurama kind of did that idea, like not the singing, but they showed him kind of floating in space and the other creatures kind of coming up to him. Futurama did an episode like that with Bender, and so I was like, "Ooh, this is a little too similar for me." Oh. But kids watching the episode probably won't know. But the other thing to me is there's a fine line between writing characters arguing and having the point be like, we want to show that this is annoying to like these characters. We want to show that, yes, Chopper and AP5 arguing is annoying to, say, the crew of the Ghost, without making it also annoying for the viewer. Right. And for me, like, I just found it annoying. Like, okay, we get it. They're arguing constantly. Like, this is genuinely annoying to me. Like, this isn't just a thing I find entertaining that they're bickering and it's annoying to like Zeb. Like, this is annoying to me as a viewer of this episode. Again, I'm not the target audience for this episode, whatever. And with the singing in Rebels Recon, Filoni said, he can't. The show just can't be dour and serious all the time. You have to kind of lighten it up. And he thought this would be funny. And I guess it felt like too much at once of like an overcorrection in that way, like having the singing and then the kind of slapsticky sound effect, clanging sound effect, right? It felt like a Warner Brothers cartoon to me. And then, like I said, the arguing is like, okay, no, that's just genuinely annoying. That was my feeling about it. But Robert, how do you feel about?
Well, I'm not familiar with the Futurama episode because I'm like one of those people that ditched Futurama around the time that they did the whole Fry's dog thing, and I never forgave. I never forgave them. So yeah. Don't know much past the third season of Futurama, so I never saw that episode. Overall, I would say I actually enjoyed it. I will say the one caveat that when there's, I guess maybe that when Dave Filoni kind of goes, oh, people are going to call this a filler episode. It's like, well, Dave, it is a filler episode. Don't sit here and tell me. I mean,
yes, it connects to the finale because they need to get codes for the base and maybe Thrawn is onto them now, whatever. But yeah,
don't sit here and act like, oh, well, I have to tell this aspect of the story and people are just going to call it filler. It's like, no, you could have explained it with a line. So don't pretend that you're not trying to do a calm before the storm episode. I mean, I won't call it a bottle episode because I don't really think you can do a bottle episode with animation. It's kind of, I don't know what the equivalent is. It's like, it's all about, bottle episodes are about saving money, and animation, I can't imagine how you save money on it. But I would agree that the no you can't, yes I can thing gets a little bit like, oh geez. It does, yeah, it does cross the threshold of being kind of it annoys and rather than relating that it is annoying the characters, it does annoy the audience. It's kind of like this thing I have this thing about anytime like time travel loops are portrayed in media, it's like like there's a Harry Potter movie and I forget which one it is, but it all necessitates them going back in time. and I can only have them do it once before I start to get annoyed. I don't like the repetition. There's actually a Monty Python skit where it all deals with this going back and repeating the same 3-minute sequence.
Yep.
I can't stand that episode.
It's deja vu episode.
Yeah, and it's just like,
Really?
yeah, it's deja vu. Maybe because I actually, when I was younger, I used to suffer from like deja vu like all the time. It was like almost like a thing. I thought I had a problem, but for some reason, that kind of stuff just makes my skin crawl. But I have to admit that goofy singing thing with like that, which is it's basically, I think what it is. And I don't want to give them full credit. I feel like they're tying into my love of Douglas Adams' Marvin the Paranoid Android idea. I mean, right down to the fake Alan Rickman, which Alan Rickman's voice, he was I guess Stephen Stanton does the AP 5 voice. And he does a fantastic take on it, but it's just something about that the nihilistic droid, you know, the machine that knows it's a machine and secretly just wants to die, but you know, or just doesn't understand why it wants to die. It's in some ways I feel like Filoni really should be sending Douglas Adams a check every time. I mean, it's a state rather every time that character comes up, because really that's who it is. And again, it's like. But then all that being said, I can't help but be charmed by it, and that kind of diversion. The fact that in a world of Star Wars, where you know where you and I will come here and for 2 hours a week we'll go, is this Star Wars? And this is what Star Wars is to me. And you'll see, Pablo Hidalgo, lamenting that people are bugging him on his vacation about the canonization of. I don't know, hot chocolate. I don't know, whatever. He's on vacation. He was lamenting. I was like, well, nobody's forcing you to read Twitter, Pablo, but
right.
That even with all that, you can kind of just go, you can still be silly and not have it be something that denigrates the story of Star Wars, where it's like all of a sudden, like, doing it, like you didn't do an episode where, Lando shows up and steps in Bantha Poodoo or whatever. It's not slapstick in that way. It doesn't denigrate the kind of all the time that people put into Star Wars and thinking about it and speculating and all the fun. But it also shows this kind of idea of this like sad droid. I mean that's the kind of like, the elephant in the room when it comes to. And it came up in the one shot for C-3PO. It's there's these robots and they're programmed to just assist, and their lives are pretty dreary. And like in some ways, a guy like AP5 getting jettisoned out into outer, and especially when they do that, the way that they just seem to have forgotten him. He's just out there floating.
Right.
And it's just like, this is exactly, it's again, it's like that joke. Well, it's an Eagleheart reference from what's his name, the guy with the bloops in the later parts of Paradise Rising, when he gets caught by a bird and he's just like, I could get used to this, and he's just flying off. And I mean, that's in some ways I loved it because it was out of kind of absurdism of like, wait a second, this is Star Wars, where basically every milk container has to have a backstory, and then all of a sudden it's like, now he's in oblivion of space, and these little birds come and kind of pick at him. But really, in some ways, it's like you could go like, well, technically they might be like these animals, and they're probably just actually sucking organic material or dust off of him for food or something. They're not showing him love. They're literally probably just kind of feeding off of him. They might something like a Minoc or something, like they might be sucking electricity out of him, and he doesn't even realize he's dying out there, and he doesn't seem to care. And there's something, I don't know what that is. Maybe it's just something so funny about it. Like, Star Wars is so much about like fighting the good fight and finding the strength within you, and we're all connected, and the Force, but in some ways it's funny to have a depiction of like people being like, I just want to die. My existence sucks, and I'll try being dead.
Good,
for a
I'm
while.
finally around no one.
Exactly. I hate the absolute, which I honestly feel like, if a real person in this day and age was plopped into the fictional Star Wars world, how much, one, it would be incredibly hard to find a bathroom we find, or be able to get privacy to use it. But, just at some point we'd probably be annoyed with the people that inhabit it. It's fun to watch it and read it, but it's like being around them. I kind of almost feel like maybe I would end up like AP5, like somebody shoot me out an airlock, before I get another platitude from some rebel about, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, that tied in with the, with just the fact that I think he just wants to talk to people. He just wants, AP5 kind of wants to engage, but it's that kind of like, they don't really talk about the concept of artificial intelligence in the computers and stuff. I mean, there was living planets in some books and whatnot, but this idea that like, they don't even realize that the droids have entire lives, because basically all the humans kind of treat them like they're a talking toaster or whatever. It's that, I guess I like that was almost kind of, and then crossed with the Josh Gad bot or whatever it was, all these people, they're all robots too, in some respects. And they're just kind of, I don't know. It was kind of, I honestly, for being a filler episode, it actually worked for me. And that was kind of weird. And again, little things like, where the hell's Kanan? Why is Kanan gone again for another week? It was a little bit like, yes, you can, no, you can't. It went on too long. That drove me nuts. But overall, I actually kind of, I think even my wife was kind of like, this has gotten too weird for me. And for some reason, I was like, I kind of liked it. I don't know. It's not necessarily like the first idea I would have if someone said, hey, pitch me a Star Wars idea. But yeah, I know. It's like, yeah, okay, it was filler, but it was good filler in a way of that AP5. I don't know why I like that guy so much. Maybe it's the Marvin the android thing.
No, I mean you're making some good points. You're kind of winning me over to AP, because I've always thought AP5 was just annoying. But or at least I think the episodes that have featured him have been pretty slow and talky. But yeah, you're right. This idea of like a droid who's just like, yeah, I kind of just want to be completely silent and like not around anyone. And my idea of perfection is just like floating in space with no one around me, and I can just be here. And even, you're talking about, droids and free will or whatever. The idea that he would want to be in charge. He's like, well, they put me in charge. I should be in charge. Like that. It's kind of an interesting sentiment for a droid to have, right? Because he's not programmed to be in charge of missions, but Hera told him he was going to be in charge, so he wants to be in charge. Like there's something, human to that even maybe more human than they've even done with Chopper before. That is kind of interesting. So yeah, I still thought it was. I wasn't offended by the Wedge bathroom stuff. I wasn't offended by the like singing and the arguing and the slapstick bit at the end. I just thought it was like it was a little too much to throw in at once, and it was like it was like overload of like, oh, this is just everything in here is different, and like maybe he's into it, but that's me, and the fact that I understand why they would do it, and Filoni saying like, well, we can't just be dour and serious all the time. It's like, yeah, absolutely. And the last couple episodes, have been pretty either tense or very serious, very heavy. So yeah, having an episode like this to break it up before you get to like Maul and Obi-Wan, and then the finale with the attack, the confrontation with Thrawn. Like, yeah, you need something like that to leaven it. Otherwise, everyone talks about like, oh, Rebels is so serious now, and is this the kind of show it's going to be? And finally, a serious they've made it a serious cartoon show. They made it for adults now. And it's like, no, we don't need to get into all that. So yeah, having these kind of moments, these kind of episodes, yeah, I think it's perfectly fine for the show to do.
I mean, and the truth is that even people that go, oh, well, this is greasy kid stuff, but maybe there's something about I see something that's like, yeah, maybe I can be a little nihilistic in my own view of the world. And I like, one of the things I like about Star Wars, it gives me like, it's not a cynical kind of thing, so you can enjoy it. But it's in some ways that like, well, okay, whoever wrote this, and I should have looked up, is obviously they gave a little due to the like, okay, hey, some people are nihilistic. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily bad or they're nihilistic all the time. But it's like, yeah, I felt like a little lip service to people that might just have a negative view. Like their default might be a little negative, and they're always striving to get out of that. But anyway, that's me reading way too much into a cartoon. We should wrap up around here, shouldn't we?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
It gives us an opportunity real quick because we read this email from a listener, Andrew in Portland, and he sent me right before we went to air. He sent me a thing. If you don't remember, he's been watching the original trilogy with a friend, and I asked him to kind of like, because it's I feel like that's a rare thing. Like I've known a few people that have never seen Star Wars. But again, this day and age, now when they're ubiquitous on television, for somebody to actually go, well, I'm going to take the time and actually watch this, I kind of like to get their takeaways. But basically, they're up to Jedi at this point, and she really enjoyed it. And she remarked about how good it still looked, or how good it looked for when it was made, which is 83. She didn't. I assume that she'd obviously never seen Jedi before, but the Jabba's Palace dance scene from the special edition, she didn't like.
Yeah.
But obviously it must.
It's just so dated. Like the music, it's so dated.
Yeah, it's god awful. It sticks out like a sore thumb every time I watch it, and it's just like honestly, I would honestly be like, whatever, keep the Jabba scene, keep the Greedo, shooting first, if you could just go back to the old version of Jedi, because I honestly feel in that really hurts that movie. Anyway, I guess she still got an emotional takeaway from when Yoda died, which again, I said on Twitter that I feel that, as much as computer technology has advanced in the last 37 years now, it's going to be in May, since Empire came out, or Jedi, whatever. Let's do. I'm not doing math. That nothing beats that puppet. You couldn't do the Dooku. I mean, I understand why they went CGI for the prequels, and I'm sure if Frank Oz's non-committal answer was means that we're going to see some Yoda, it's going to be a CGI Yoda. But I just feel like for all you lose in motion, you gain in the physical feedback of a man with his hand up a puppet's behind. But anyway, so she liked the Ewoks, and Andrew had to explain to his friend what the deal with Hayden Christensen popping up at the end, because obviously we've got Sebastian Shaw, and then we cut, and she was like, who is this guy? And although I guess she said she would have been able to put it together, but she liked the ghosts at the end. So I guess she kind of, she took away, but there was a question that Andrew had, and I'll pause it, that this to you, is that he had some questions about the period of time that takes between I assume what he means, the original trilogy. It seems from A New Hope to Empire to Jedi, Luke gets significant power boosts and more skills. Has the period of time between the movies been explained or figured out? Also, I'm assuming Luke is going around and finding holocrons and learning more about the Force and the Jedi during these periods. I mean, some of it's been depicted in the Star Wars comic thing. It's like the journals of Ben Kenobi. And
he's not finding so much. He's not finding holocrons so much as he's reading Ben Kenobi's journal, and in at least lately reading about Yoda. I mean, the Screaming Citadel crossover that's coming up, at least from what they've said about it so far, it sounds like that's an opportunity where he's like, oh, this is how I become a Jedi, and I need this thing to become a Jedi. And so that's maybe a situation where he's going to learn. But yeah, I mean, throughout the Star Wars comic, I mean, we saw him, fighting the Game Master with his lightsaber and not doing as great. So it's a learning process, and we are watching him learn in the comic more than anything else, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, my takeaway from that, and again, this is just my personal preference, is I kind of liked this amorphous idea that, like, Luke ends A New Hope basically using an assist from Obi-Wan, helping him to focus, blah, 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 and he's able to destroy the Death Star. But then the next time we see him, he's able to focus and do telekinetic powers, blah, blah. He's still not there. I kind of like the idea that they never quite explain it, or whether we question whether or not these are things that have come from meditation. It's almost like Luke has his awakening kind of happens at the Death Star, and then he's slowly awakening. And by the time he's actually figured out that he's probably been, I don't know if they've depicted this in media, but by the time he's in that Wampus cave and he has to use his powers to grab his lightsaber, it's like, in some ways he's opened himself up fully, and that's kind of now why he can see Obi-Wan. But I always like that they don't explain it exactly why. It's because I feel like the explanation would never be as good as the explanation in your own head. It's the same thing at the Force Ghost, whereas, like, all I wanted at the end of Return of the Revenge of the Sith is to have them explain why some Jedi can be ghosts and some can't, but they never do. And then I didn't actually, the Clone Wars cartoon, which, just as a quick aside, it's not leaving Netflix. Turned out not to be true.
Still on
Netflix, people. I didn't like the answers that they had. It never even really processed in my head, like, to the point where I don't even remember what their reasoning was behind it, and I've never held on to it. So me personally, I don't want an explanation. I mean, you could say, yeah, it's holocrons, it's thing, because that way, the fact that there's no, like, thing where they go, oh, he had to do this XYZ to get it, it kind of helps kind of support the idea of, like, why was Rey all of a sudden so powerful so fast? Well, it's like, it's all about giving yourself over to it. It's not learning something and then processing it and then adding it to your knowledge. It's more of, like, acquiescing to the Force and letting it guide you. And that's how, like, she went from being kind of a slightly timid scavenger on Jakku, who just basically dealt in junk for food, to someone who could basically, within a few tries, convince a First Order stormtrooper. And also, again, it wasn't like a huge thing, because, again, what Obi-Wan says, the Force has a strong impact on the weak-minded, and we know that the First Order stormtroopers have been indoctrinated since birth. Therefore, they're weak-willed. Generally, it wouldn't have been a thing of like, her making Poe Dameron all of a sudden do something, or, someone who's an individual. So I kind of like the idea that it almost the Force unfolds a little differently for every person. Right. There's a lot of speculation that Rey might be an anomaly in and of itself. At least that's and even, right, she could have been tapping into her anger or fear. The dark side is more powerful. It's quicker path to that. They've explained, she kind of surprised Kylo Ren, so he was kind of off his guard, and he was injured. He was bleeding, in that lightsaber duel with Rey. There are lots of kind of in-story ways that they could explain how she was able to maybe not defeat Kylo Ren, but at least kind of survive, hold her own against Kylo Ren in that moment, while, Luke Skywalker takes a little longer. I mean, he has his own kind of moments. They're not necessarily lightsaber-based moments, but, shooting, blowing up the Death Star, shooting down those TIE fighters. I mean, those very well could be at least, blowing up the Death Star, that is a manifestation of
him tapping into the Force and knowing at exactly the right moment to hit the trigger on those torpedoes, right? That happened pretty quick, and so it just looked a little different. So I've never been that concerned with it. Like, oh well, why is Rey so more powerful now at this point than Luke was, at this point in his journey? But yeah, I mean, we are, and even if you think of Empire Strikes Back, I mean, he did okay for a little bit against Vader at the end, but he still wasn't really ready. And at that point, all he had done was be able to lift some rocks. We don't know. He hadn't been able to get the thing out. He didn't do that well at the end of Empire Strikes Back, right? So it's usually, I mean, you hear this with sports and stuff. But I apologize for jumping to sports. But you hear this thing that development is not necessarily linear. So you could see, someone right at the beginning take several steps forward in their development and then take some steps back and kind of regress until they need to figure out what's going to work for them consistently. And so maybe it's the same with both Luke and blowing up the Death Star, compared to where he was in Empire Strikes Back and Rey, fighting Kylo Ren with a lightsaber compared to where we may see her in Episode 8, right? We may see her take some steps back. It could just be kind of in the moment she tapped into the Force and, Kylo Ren was wounded and that contributed. And so, there are lots of in-story kind of ways they could explain it. In terms of seeing Luke's regression, I mean, I imagine the old Marvel comic and then the Dark Horse stuff probably addressed it to a certain extent. I mean, I guess there's that Heir to the Jedi novel that is technically canon now, but no one really thinks is very good.
Right.
That came out that sort of gets at this as well. So if you don't want to read the comics, I guess I would suggest reading that novel, although I haven't read it. You haven't read it, but all of the reviews I've read of it said it's not very good. So they're kind of finding other ways to show that progression, that development. It's basically whatever serves the larger story, right? They can't have him progress too quickly in these comics because come Empire Strikes Back, like he's okay, but not amazing.
Yeah.
So he does kind of level up, from Empire to Jedi. That could be any number of things. It could be that he's much calmer. He more, he knows his purpose. He is kind of more at home with himself. That I imagine we won't see for a while. Maybe there's a novel in there. I don't know. But, that I think is maybe even the bigger jump from Empire to Jedi compared to, A New Hope to Empire.
Yeah. And I mean, basically my takeaway is that I don't think there's a satisfying answer to your question because I just feel like they've never quite figured out what they want to do with it, how much they want to keep it mystical, how much they want it to be like a series of, concepts or book concepts that they have to read and understand, or trials. So, I mean, like I said, if you really think there's the Heir to the Jedi book, there's the Star Wars series, which although I don't feel like they've gone super deep into it. So again, it's not satisfying, but if that's what you're looking for, you might want to try those out. So if you have questions, if you want to pick our brains on a specific topic, Star Wars related, best thing to do is to email us at host, it's HOSTS @talkingbirdcast.com. Again, we are at Twitter at talkingbirdcast. We have a website, www.talkingbirdcast.com, and we have an Amazon affiliate link that helps support the show, and that is www.talkingbirdcast.com/Amazon. Let me just do that again. www.talkingbirdcast.com/Amazon. And it's just a way to help support the show, and we always appreciate when you use that. Did you have anything you wanted to add, John?
No, I mean, I guess next week we'll probably be catching up on some comics.
Yeah,
Poe Dameron, the last couple issues of Poe Dameron, Dr. Aphra. So if you have anything you want to say about those, how you think those are going, if you have any questions about those for us, send them along and we'll talk about them next week.
Yeah, I would kind of like, if anybody's out there that listens is reading Aphra, I'd kind of like some another takeaway on it. Just maybe if someone's enjoying it or not enjoying it. So that's, if you guys want some homework, get out on that Aphra and give us a shout on that. But I think I'm getting tired, so I gotta go. So I'm gonna wrap this up because I'm getting spacey. I will thank you for listening. For Talking Birdcast, I have been Robert Zachary.
I'm still John Llewellyn.
Again, thanks for listening, and may the Force be with you.
You have to imagine that this really is sung by me. No, not now. Some years back. And so just think that I'm doing a better job of this than Dylan would be doing of trying to sing Mr. Tambourine Man with the original melody now. But it's slightly in the same camp. I apologize. It's just flying to work, It was different when I was a kid because school was 4 miles away and you got the bus. Now I travel about 3,000 miles to get to work and back, and it just gets tiring sometimes, not in obvious ways. I mean, there's no good walking up to someone and saying, "Man, you look really tired." Obviously, you've just gotten so obviously tired, you poor senile old goat. Why don't you remove those balloons from your lungs and just climb into the barrel of your life and screw it down permanently and have someone seal it off with bitumen and will dig you up in 25,000 years and sell you. People don't really talk like that to each other, do they? Saying, "Man, Steve was looking a bit tired." I mean, good, but tired. Well, he's dying. Oh, we're all dying, yeah, but he's supernovaed. But then, if you haven't, I'm sure some of you have children called Stephen, or were called Stephen as children, and have been called David by mistake. Or Davida, but that's a real name. You have the same problem, but it's going to happen to them. You can't say, "I will call this child Stephen, it'll never die." Because that, in the end, although it would seem well-intentioned, would mean that over the millennia, the planet and the other planets that our species colonized, let alone the feline dynasty which will come after us, but ape us in the most bizarre ways. Even now, our little cats are bounding up and down at home thinking, "I can't wait to have kittens called Steve that don't ever die." Oh, Norman, put your whiskers away. It's not happening in your lifetime. And so, that could be a problem, because first you've got the race of the immortal Steves, and then you've got the immortal feline Steves, and there's only so much room. Even if there are infinite universes, there's even more infinite number of Steves. None of that is mentioned in this song. Can you try and make my voice sound beautiful? Not fun, but beautiful, like Art Garfunkel, as if he'd never had a cigar.